Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do an unboxing on a review copy of Captain C, the newly released 2021 wargame on combat in the Age of Sail. It's published by Legion Games and designed by Mike Nagel. Now specifically this game focuses on United States frigates and some of the battles that they had from 1799 to 1815. So let's jump in, take a look at the components, and offer some initial impressions. Before we jump in and kind of open it up and take a look at what's inside, let's talk a little bit about the scope and scale of the game, because I think it's important to understand that before we kind of digging things apart a little bit. First of all, you may think, oh, is this like 10 ships versus 10 ships? But it's not. This is a game that focuses on ship versus ship combat, specifically frigates versus frigates in this time period here of 1799 to 1815. Even more specifically on the 6 U.S. frigates that were kind of the birth of the U.S. Navy. So we're talking about the Quasi-War versus France, and then the War of 1812. What were the actions that those 6 U.S. frigates were involved in? So this is very much a game where you're going to have one player commanding one frigate, another player commanding another frigate. You're going to be trying to outguess each other, trying to decide how to maneuver your crew and kind of position your crew and get them to be able to perform up to function. What kind of shot are you going to have loaded? What kind of approach you're going to take? Trying to work so you're going to be able to get broadsides against your opponent. So it's this ship versus ship duel, if you would. 1 versus 1. That's really the heart of this game. Now, before we jump in as well and take a look what's inside, I wanted to mention one other thing, because if you're looking for something and you like to read, it's amazing how much this book and this game go together. So 6 Frigates by Ian Toll. I'm almost done with this one now. This is a story about the birth of the U.S. Navy, and the 6 frigates that this book is specifically about are the 6 frigates that are in this game. So these go together. This is a book about this game. This is a game about this book. Now the book is much broader. It talks about like how the ships were built. It talks about the politics behind it. It talks a lot about the mood in the United States during this time, merchant marine, all these different kinds of elements. So this is much broader, but all of the engagements that are in the game are detailed in the book. And so you could read the book and learn more about the history behind the game. And if you're playing the game, you're going to say, oh, okay, how can I learn more about the history of this time? This is the book to do that. So just a quick mention for that, because it's a fantastic book and they go together. It would make a great holiday 2-pack, if you would, if you've got someone that you know likes this time in history. So with that being said, let's flip it over. It's an 1.75-inch box. It's got some heft to it because, as we'll see, there is some wood inside. Nice little back of the box here. Let's take a quick talk about this game meter element here, because there's 3 things on it that are worth mentioning. First up, it's highlighting 2 players as the goal. I don't think this will work at all. I mean, I'm sure you could be creative and figure out some way to do it, but it's not designed as more than a 2-player game. And it's not really designed even for 3-ship combat. So it talks a little bit about that, and we'll mention that as we get inside. But the heart of this game is player versus player, ship versus ship, and that's really where it's going to shine. Now, it does say solitaire suitability is medium to low. I think why it goes medium to low is because of 2 places. One, and we'll talk about that as we get inside more, it's maneuvering and then also kind of disguising what type of shot you have loaded. And I have some thoughts on that as to ways I think you might be able to make that higher, and so we'll kind of explore that a little bit. Game complexity says medium, 3 to 5. I've looked over the rules and kind of did a quick read through of the rules and kind of the example of play and stuff, and I feel like if it were 1 to 10, this would be a 4. So I feel like it's on the lighter side of medium. I feel like it's going to be a game that plays fast, and once you get your head around some of the novelty behind a couple of the mechanics and how to manage your ship and crew and stuff like that, I think it's going to be a pretty fast-playing game. I don't have a sense yet for how long one ship versus ship combat engagement's going to take. If I had to speculate at this point, I'm going to say half an hour to maybe an hour if you've got a lot of maneuvering before you kind of get some broadsides off there. But I'm guessing on that. I won't know really until I kind of dig in and get a chance to play. This is kind of some general impressions based on what we're looking at so far. So let's open her up and take a look at what's inside. Lots of things to play with inside. Lots of fun in the box. This is some promotional material for some of Mike Nagel's other games that he's produced, and then another game here from Legion Wargames, which you can definitely check out. We get some instructions on how to put stickers on blocks, which is always helpful. And with that in mind, let's take a look at the stickers and the blocks here. So you get a set of blocks and a set of stickers. And these are the maneuver blocks. And this is where that basically, I think, a lot of that deception in disguise and why it's not rated so highly for a single player game. Because basically you're going to make 3 sets of stickers. You get these top stickers for the US, British, and French. And these basically represent the different maneuver choices that you're going to make. And you're going to disguise these from your opponent. Depending on your relative position to the wind, certain of them are going to be available to you and certain of them aren't. But your opponent's not going to know what you're doing until you've had enough impulses to be able to make that maneuver. So this is kind of that rock, paper, scissors kind of, how can I get a broadside off? What kind of maneuvers am I going to make to beat my opponent and things like that, where an element of disguise goes. Now I think that there'll be a way to kind of do some calculations to be able to work this in single player mode. And I was talking to Old Lady Plays, another wargame video creator and content creator. She was talking about kind of thinking about creating an AI bot for the opposing ships. So, maybe there's some potential there. And I think on Board Game Geek, we imagine we'll probably see some people kind of explore those opportunities. But the basic idea here, again, is that these blocks and maneuver blocks are going to be used to disguise the maneuvering to your opponent. Hefty blocks, good size, and everything like that. And we'll get the stickers on these before we try the game, of course. So put those to the side. Those look great. There are dice involved and some dice chucking. It looks like as many as 3 dice can be involved in a particular firing from a ship. So we get 6 dice, 6-sided, and those are all good and well, 3 blue and 3 white. Now we come to the counters in the game. There are only 3 counters. You get 1 generic, and these are octagonal in shape. They fit inside the 1-inch squares of the map board, which is basically a map of water, and we'll talk about that as we get to it. But I'll put a close-up of these up here too. These are wooden pieces, nice and hefty, good, nice, rich quality to them. And these stickers will go on these pieces, basically, and then you can see the ship's relative position to the wind. So here's the bow of the ship, and the stern of the ship is at sea. So if the wind is pushing straight from the stern, you're going to get a running with the wind, which is a sea gauge. And these are how you're basically going to use to calculate all your maneuvers and such like that. So we get 1 sticker for French, 1 sticker for English, and 1 sticker for the US. 3 counters altogether. Now, there are cards involved, which I was excited to see because I think these are going to be a way to get a lot of variability and unpredictability into the game. There are 55 cards in all, I believe, and there are 2 different types. So we get some Play Now cards, which I'll show a couple samples here. There are 8 of these. Some of these look particularly devastating. We get a Wind Change, which is mild, but we get one here, Water to the Gunwales, which says basically each ship rolls a die for every eliminated hull section. If any roll is a 6, the ship has become awash and strikes its colors, game over. We get one called Explosion, which sounds pretty ominous. And then we get a big pile of them here that you're going to hold in your hand, and you can play at various points during the game. Things like Master Gunner, He's in My Head. We get Hard Over. The ship may execute more than 1 wear in the same square. Get one's a Grape Shot. When firing at range of no more than 3 movement points, specify an attack die roll is loaded with Grape Shot rather than apply or hollering. So just a lot of different ways to create some variety and unpredictability in the encounters. So I'm excited to see how those play once we get things going as well. Let's take a look at the rulebook now. There are 2 documents that come with the game, rules book and rules of play and a playbook. And we'll take a look at each one of these in turn. All right, so the rulebook here is 16 pages, glossy print, 8.5 by 11, very big print, easy to read. And that's why I think, as it rates at a moderate, I think I read through it, kind of cruised through it. It looks fairly straightforward. And I like to, as I did in the last unboxing, I'm going to kind of just take a moment to touch on some of the key sections of the rules because I think they highlight the mechanics behind the game. So these are some key concepts. One is what they talk about relative movement. And that's why the game, I think, functions as basically a 2-ship game, because what they've done, rather than having your ships move all over the map, if both ships are moving in the same speed in the same direction, they're not going to move on the map because it's relative to each other that you're going to be moving the ships around. So it's that kind of mechanic, I think, that keeps the game nice and centered and focused. But it does make it, of course, in turn then tricky to adjust if you've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 different ships and things like that. You've got wind position to handle. There mentions the cards. Also the turns. Each turn is divided up into 12 different impulses. And so depending upon the maneuverability and speed of your ship, you may have chances to take more actions during those impulses as opposed to a slower ship. This section 3 talks about ship display. We'll talk about that in a moment. Sequence of play, maneuvering, firing, different kinds of things that's going. A lot of detail involved in managing ships and managing how you're going to handle your crew and things. And this is mechanic 5 is assigning crew. So you have a certain number of crew points, and there's never enough, it looks like, especially when they start getting hurt, to be able to figure out what they're going to do. There's initiative involved, a calculation for determining relative movement rate. And then we get basically a page and a half here on this maneuvering mechanic, on that cat and mouse game, and how you handle that. But not, I mean, pretty straightforward. It does bring in some nautical terms, which is kind of cool, some things that I didn't know about. But I have since learning at the rules, things like wearing and stuff like that. Then a chunk of the rules here, so the middle really 4 pages are on firing. Kind of things like raking and broadsides and how you're going to maneuver and what kind of damage you can do. Morale checks and things like that, applying smoke and everything. One of the things that I think looks really exciting about the game here is the way that, I mean, I think one of the challenges of the design here is getting the right level of detail for this ship-to-ship combat. You don't want it to be too fiddly, yet you need to have enough detail to really highlight some of the mechanics of ship-to-ship combat and some of the decisions that you have to make as a captain. And kind of looking through things, I feel like they've got a nice balance here between playability and detail. I don't feel like it's going to be too fiddly, and yet it does seem to me like you're going to be faced with a lot of really interesting, in particular, kind of what type of shot do you load? Do you aim high or do you aim low? How are you going to maneuver? And then how are you going to manage your crew? I think these are kind of the fun decisions that the game's going to involve. And of course, I won't know really until we get it out and we play it and things like that, but that to me seems to be like all of those areas kind of like, oh yeah, this is going to be pretty cool. I mean, this is going to be really fun to play. Grappling and melee, there's a couple more sections here on the rules, so if you're in the same square, there's a chance that the ships could end up bound to each other, in which case you would go to melee. Then the game can end in whether the ship is captured or it strikes its colors, or a ship cannot maneuver in a manner that keeps it on the map. I'm not sure quite how that third one works, but it strikes me as that might be one of the more rarer victory conditions. It does talk a little bit about how easy it will be to design your own scenarios, and we'll talk about that as we look at the ship mats. And then it does kind of some options here for multi-ship options, which is kind of it gives some ideas and some guidelines if you'd like to explore those possibilities with the game. But again, rules look relatively straightforward, relatively easy to read and easy to digest. The mechanics make sense, so I think it's going to be low to moderate in terms of complexity in play. Now, the second aid you get to learning the game, and in the second kind of document here, is this 24-page playbook. Consists of 3 sections. The first section, the first half of it really, is an example of play. So it goes through in detail ship-to-ship combat here between the Constellation and the Java. So it sets it up and then it moves. And this is basically 11 pages, walking through turn after turn. I think it goes through maybe 2 or 3 turns here, talking about the combat, what has to happen, and how the rules are implemented. So I think it's going to be a great addition to learning how to play the game, and then how it ends up as it ends up on that last turn that they detail. But again, we got 11 pages here of that. Then we get 3 pages of design notes to get inside Mike Nagel's head as to kind of what things he was thinking about. I have not read this part yet as he was designing the game, but I'm sure that's interesting in terms of some of the novelty and some of the new mechanics that are involved here. Then the back half here of this playbook are the 10 scenarios. So there are 10 scenarios. 8 of them are historical. We see here the Constellation versus Les Insurgents. We get Constellations versus Guerrière, La Vengeance, Constitution versus Guerrière. And then we have, so 8 of these are ship to ship. However, this one here is President versus Belvedere. This second scenario here is the multi-ship option. So it does give you a chance to explore 3 ships in one engagement, which assumes that basically the Congress caught up to the president and the Belvedere in its engagement. Again, these are the quasi-war engagements and the War of 1812, as well as a couple that extend off into 1813 and then up into 1815, United States versus Macedonian. And so 8 of these are actual encounters. At the top, it outlines what really happened in the combat, which is cool to read about how the combat really went and some of the history behind it, some of the crew and some of the unique conditions for that combat that are going to be involved with the setup. And then, of course, a lot of the artwork in the game is really cool, and some of these pictures just really to help set the mood for it. The last 2 scenarios are hypothetical ones that involve the Congress, which is a ship, one of the frigates that didn't get into any actual combat, so they've created a couple of hypothetical situations so you can get that ship into action as well. So that looks good. We've got counters here. I'm not sure there's too much to say about the counters. Some of them are two-sided. Most of these, again, you're going to see the ship counters on the map. Some smoke counters, I think, can also go on the game playing map. But most of these counters, there's a set for the US, a set for English, and a set for France, which are used on your ship mats to basically manage and navigate, manage your kind of crew and what you're doing in terms of the management of your ship. So we'll take a look at the ship mats, which I think will kind of help that as well. I'll show some close-ups on these, but again, these are counters that are basically used in terms of managing your ship on the ship map more than they are as counters that appear on the game board. We can see some of the two-sided ones here. There is the second deceptional element. You mentioned the maneuvering. That looks like there's some deception. You're trying to hide things from your opponent. Also, the shot type that you pick is something that you're going to hide from your opponent. You can have double shot, round shot, or chain shot, and that is kind of impacting whether you're aiming for the hull, whether you're aiming at the rigging and stuff like that. So that's something that you're going to hide from your opponent. Although I don't get a sense that is kind of as large of a factor as the maneuvering is in terms of if you're thinking about playing this as a solitaire game. Now the cool part. Well, they're all cool parts, but this is in particular, I think, another really cool part. So there's 8 of these on 2 sides. These are the ship mats. And I'll show a close-up of a couple of these. Here's the Constitution. Each one of these is unique based on the unique characteristics of the 16 different ships that are modeled in the game. Some of them better than the others. Obviously, the Constitution being probably the best or one of the best ones modeled in the game. And there is also, by the way, if you're having a stronger ship go up against a weaker ship, there's a victory point multiplier calculation you make. So that basically gives the weaker ship a lot more victory points for doing damage than the stronger ship would get in turn for doing damage to the weaker ship. So there's a balancing factor, a play balance factor that allows you to have some battles that in turn can be played out against a weaker ship against a stronger ship, and the weaker ship still has a chance to win the game even though they may lose the engagement type of thing. I could go into a lot of detail on these, but I think it's worthy just kind of pointing out a few things here. On the left side, you get how many crew there are, and as you suffer losses, they're going to go down. We see things like crew quality, where they are, the sail state, so you can have fighting sails or medium sails. And I think these are interesting to see because they show a lot of the decisions that you're going to be making in the game. And how you allocate your crew onto these different tasks, whether they're going to be kind of under damage control, whether they're going to be changing the rigging, whether they're going to be, which side of the ship are they going to be on in terms of loading and stuff like that, and firing and things like that. And you're not going to have enough crew, and you got to manage that crew. You've got to leave some over for melee, because if you don't have any crew assigned to melee and all of a sudden you end up grappling, well, that could be game over as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of fun decisions in terms of how you have the ships battle out against each other in terms of how you're trying to manage your crew in each one of these engagements. So 16 of these, 8 cards, two-sided, so you get 16 different historical ships modeled in the game, which is very cool. And then we have a couple more things to look through. There are 2 player aids. These are identical. One is for your movement tables and a sequence of play, which we can show a close-up of here. So basically, there's kind of a simple calculation process that you do that you're going to determine that kind of base movement points and how what kind of movement capacity your ship has to make maneuvers and things like that. So that's one thing. And then here is the damage effects table as well as the morale effects table. The damage effects table looks so cool. And I don't understand yet, I confess, I don't understand yet how it works in the game, but basically these higher results are if you've hit high on an enemy ship, and these lower results are if you hit lower. So for example, this devastating one where you've got 12 hits achieved. On the lower part here, it's 11 hull, 1 rigging, 1 crew. But on the top, it's 11 rigging, 1 hull, 1 crew. So again, part of the tactics there, are you trying to take out the rigging on the opponent's ship, or you're trying to blow holes in its hull, or you're going straight across and trying to perhaps damage the crew in the middle here too. So lots of different, I'm curious to see how this plays out, but this looks like a really neat and really creative idea, creative way to handle that. Last but not least, we have the map. Now, I'll show a zoomed out shot of this so you can get a sense of what it looks like. Each one of these, it's a square map, and those octagonal ship counters are going to fit inside that square map, and then you're going to move those around. So it's a really elegant system where you've got octagons fitting inside those inch squares to kind of create the different wind positions for the ship. So that looks pretty neat. The map is basically, there's 3 pieces to it. One is the 3 elements to it, if you would. The blue ocean with the inch squares. On the side, you've got this kind of turn impulse record that's going to show you, kind of help you to manage the action during the turns. And then the other thing I wanted to just show real quick here because it's really, I think it's one of the neater things that I've seen in terms of how the game works is this maneuvering chart. And I'll show a close-up of this as well. So each player has one of these, and depending upon the position of your ship to the wind, so for example, if you're in this position A or B, which is kind of broad reaching, you're going to have these maneuvers that you can pick from. If you're in F or G, beating to the wind, then you're going to have these maneuvers. Each maneuver takes a certain number of activations to be able to do. So some of them are easier to do than others. So you can imagine, okay, I really want to do one that's going to take 3 turns, but that's going to leave me perhaps a little bit vulnerable in between then. So lots of different decisions I think that could be making in here. One of the things that I thought was cool is that tacking is dangerous. You know, you're trying to basically move the ship across the wind to have it go off in its alternate direction. And that's something that you can fail at, and basically the ship ends up in what's called in irons, which is facing dead into the wind and dead to the wind. And there is a mechanic in here for tacking where you could fail that way, and so now all of a sudden your ship is stuck against the wind. So I think just a lot of real fun decisions and intricacy that looks like it's going to be here involved with terms of maneuvering and then trying to outguess your opponent. So I'm really excited to see how that plays out. But that brings us to the end here. I think we've looked at pretty much everything that's involved. I'm looking at the pieces, I'm super excited to play. I think the test comes in terms of let's get it to the board, let's see how it plays. But everything I'm seeing so far, I'm really excited because it looks to me like a game that's really got a nice balance between complexity and playability. And they've really done a lot of thinking, I think, on how ship-to-ship combat plays out and leaving a lot of really fun, interesting decisions to the player. And it doesn't look to me in any way, shape, manner, or form that it's going to get overly fiddly or that it's going to be too simplistic. It looks like there's I get a sense they've struck a nice level of depth. So coming up, though, as what we'll do on the channel, the next up, I'm going to play a couple of learning games and try to sort things out in terms of how I might be able to do that. Single player, I'm going to play a couple, I think, 2-player games and test those out. And I want to come back and do a sort of playthrough on the channel. So I've got an idea, too, for perhaps a series that I'd like to do. I've got an idea bumping around in my head for that. So that will be next. This is the unboxing. Next, we're going to do some kind of a playthrough. And then after I get a chance to spend some time with the game to more depth, I'm going to come back for a final review. So this will be one of at least 3 videos on the game, but perhaps a little bit more if that playthrough element, if I can expand on that idea that I'm thinking. But let me know what you think. How does it look? I'm really excited about it. I think the design's elegant. It's an area I'm very interested in, and again, I think they've got a nice balance between complexity, simplicity, and playability, at least from what I can tell from looking at everything. And now comes the fun part, we get a chance to play it, so looking forward to digging in. But if you have enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new, please consider subscribing. That always helps the channel out when we get thumbs up because it helps bring the video in front of other people. And I hope you have a great day. Let me know what you think about the game, and we'll be back in a few days with some sort of playthrough on the game. Excited to dig in and give this a shot. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.